Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. So I put a poll up on the channel earlier this week asking you guys out of 3 video topics which one you guys wanted to see this Friday. Now I didn't specify, usually when I do these types of polls the other 2 video ideas get canceled, but this time around these will actually be future videos anyway. So for the second place of this one, which was the favorite card from each global market, that will be coming out next Monday. So stay tuned for that as that comes closer to fruition. That was a very popular choice. Ironically enough, the KDM video, which was actually one I was most excited to make, got practically no views. I believe it didn't get any. But that will be also a future video as well, unless I do another one of these polls next week with some more video ideas, and let you guys pick through those again for the 2 videos for the week. I think that's really how I'll do things for now. That way you guys are able to pick what content you guys see during this whole time where the truck is gone. And hopefully I'll have more news on that sometime soon. And the whole purpose of this video even existing is because I didn't hear anything and don't know any sort of details still on the truck's condition and or location. So let's get right into the video. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the theoretical replacements for the truck, and speaking of it. And this video is not to say that it is being replaced. Who knows, maybe it won't. It's just a theoretical. That's why I'm being very clear about it being theoretical, is that we don't know any sort of details yet, and it's really dependent on one scenario only, and that is the damage costs are too high. Pretty much, if it's going to cost me, upwards of $1,000 to $2,000 to repair the truck after the fire and whatever else happened, or whatever else carnage ensued from that, then I'm prepared to, part it out and scrap it. I mean, that is something that I don't necessarily want to do, but I've kind of just taken it in the fact that I've had it for 4.5 years, almost 5 years now, and with all the problems that it's giving me, it's starting to show its age as a 245, almost 250,000 mile truck. It's starting to have a lot of issues, and that's just kind of like, if I pay that $1,000 to $2,000 to get it fixed, it'll fix that problem specifically. The fact that it caught fire, whatever damage was caused by the fire, and the transmission, but will not solve the fact it still doesn't have working AC. There's still a fuel smell somewhere that I cannot figure out to save my life. There's still a destroyed headliner due to water damage that is still causing an issue. There's still the chain rattle, the the crank pulley issue. All the issues that truck has are still going to be present even after spending that kind of money, which is probably why I'm so against the idea of dropping another $2,500, because I'd rather use that money to fix all the other problems. Fix the water leak, fix the crank pulley issue, fix the fuel smell, and all the other issues a truck has. I'd like to fix. So theoretically, if I had to choose between, dropping $2,500 for repairing the fire damage in the transmission versus going and fixing everything else wrong with the truck, I'd rather fix everything else that's wrong with the truck, which is why if they repair it under warranty, no big deal, no harm, no foul, I'll just continue on my plan as per usual, and we'll be good to go, and it will be fixed, we'll be good to go. However, if they are keen to throw me under the bus for $1,000 or $2,000 plus, I am prepared to take the action to part the thing out. Everything except for the radio and wheels would be up for grabs, as well as the tuner. Pretty much the SCT, the wheels, and the radio would be staying with me. Everything else would be up for grabs. Ironically enough, 3 of the most expensive parts of that truck I would be keeping. But everything else, like the headlights would be sold, the taillights would be sold, the exhaust would be sold. Everything that could come off the truck that would not be those 3 items, the tuner, the wheels, and the radio would be up for grabs in that scenario. But again, that's a lot to ask. We don't know any sort of specifics on the damage yet anyway, so who knows what'll happen, but that's kind of that. But anyway, I've been sitting here rambling on for 4 minutes, and this is how I messed up the last recording of this video. So let's get right into my theoretical replacement cars. Now, I have several rules here, that is to kind of keep insurance costs down. So no coupes, no trucks, no convertibles. And a lot of people are probably going to be a little upset about that with the no trucks part, because this channel was around a truck for the longest time, but I've been saying for several years now that once the Sport Trac reached its end, I would not be buying another truck for a build. It would probably be something as like a daily driver or a tow rig. It would be kind of basic. It would probably stay stock. It would probably be clapped out. I mean, it would be kind of pointless other than, driving it once a month or twice a month to tow cars somewhere. That'd be the only way you'd see me in another truck. That's kind of the unfortunate for those people who only care about trucks and don't care about the car side, but that's kind of the scenario we're in. Obviously, coupes and convertibles are kind of obvious when it comes to insurance. They cost a fortune, and trucks as well, apparently, which was new information to me last year. I want to keep insurance costs down, but still get something that's really fun and it's going to be a blast to drive. And that's kind of the main things I wanted. Fuel economy is also kind of an important focus this time around as well. Going from a vehicle that gets an average of about 12 to 14 miles per gallon, I'd like to get something that is at least 20. Of course, obviously, I do have like a couple of exceptions to that rule, which I'll get into in a minute. And I'm going to go through each car from their country of origin. So we're going to start with the American side, and this is probably the one that has the most exceptions to the rules. As my first three contenders are all V8 sedans. And ironically enough, there are no Fords on this list for the extreme reason that the Fords that I would want, which are the Focus ST and the Fiesta ST, are still a bit above what I'm willing to spend. Obviously, the Mustang would be in consideration if I was going to be able to swing a coupe on insurance. I can't afford that, so unfortunately Mustangs are kind of out of contention. And of course, my other rule for the American cars is no V6s, because the good V6s, like the 3.6 Venostar, the 3.7, and the Camaro 3.6 are all out of reach. So getting into a good V8 sedan leaves me with only 3 options from America, or 4 technically, if you include the Crown Vic, which, I mean, I wouldn't really consider it, but it is on the list because of like V8 sedans at least. It's not really in my contention though. That would be the 2005 to 2010 Dodge Charger RT. You can commonly find these in my price limit, which is $8,000. Granted, they have a good bit of mileage at that point. Usually about 9 to 10 is about the sweet spot for a used 05 to 10 Charger RT. But I've been able to see a couple of 05 to 10s drop under 9, under 8, which is about what I'm willing to spend. So the RT is 5.7 V8, 5-speed auto. Probably not the best all-around fun car, but it is fun in a straight line. And with a V8 soundtrack, that's not like can go wrong. Obviously, the exception to the rule is the fact that it's really bad on gas. I mean, I believe the 5.7 cars only got about 15 miles per gallon. So jumping into from one really crappy fuel economy vehicle to another one, which is being a little bit smaller and having a V8, it's almost a worthy trade-off for me, but it is something that I am not too keen on, and the fact that my experiences with older Dodge products has been pretty bad. Both of our last 2 Dodges have been really poor quality vehicles, so it's kind of one of those cars. It's a shot in the dark if it would be good for me or not, but it is a car that I am willing to buy, and I do have a lot of a love for the Charger platform as a whole. So getting, even though it would be one of the earlier models that is notoriously, has a ton of issues as the crappier 5-speed transmission versus the 8-speed, I do feel like it is something that I would strongly consider. And of course, its sibling, which I prefer over the Charger from this era, is the Magnum. And again, this would be another RT-only platform. You would not see me buying any of the V6 variants, but I would be totally getting a Magnum RT. We almost had one in the family. My mom actually test drove and was very close to pulling the trigger on an 07, I believe it was an 07 Magnum RT, but just wasn't able to pull the trigger on it. Just couldn't convince herself to make that final push to get the car. And so I have a lot of nostalgia and attraction in a Magnum RT, and I think that it would be a really good platform for me because I would be able to do the Charger conversion and put the 15 front end on it. And therefore, it fulfilled kind of my dream of having a modern Charger with a wagon on the end. And I love station wagons, which is probably one of the biggest reasons why I like the Magnum in general. As well as from America, we do have a third Dodge contender, which is, of course, the Dodge Dart with the 1.4 turbo. Now, a lot of people in the sport track community have been moving to these cars, and it seems to be kind of the common move for people from the sport track world. They see this car that's modern with a four-cylinder turbo engine. I said 4-speed manual. 4-cylinder turbo with a good 6-speed manual option, and they will immediately jump ship to it. It's a tried-and-true platform, the motor being shared with the Abarth 500. It's a really good setup, and the only issue is they're notoriously unreliable, and they're cheap. And for most people, the cheap part isn't a big deal, but the reliability is, and that's kind of a huge problem for me, is the Dart is known for having reliability problems, much like its Chrysler 200 sibling. So being able to convince myself, hey, it's okay, I can, deal with a car that's got a little bit of quirks and stuff like that. And of course, unlike other cars on this list, the Dart actually does not have as big of an aftermarket, even compared to one of my Asian representatives, which is notoriously kind of loved, but also doesn't have a lot of performance aftermarket. The Dart's aftermarket is really small. There's no really any big turbo upgrades for the Dart 1.4, which is something I would want capability of if I got a 4-cylinder turbo car, would be to upgrade the turbo and make it faster. And the Dart doesn't necessarily have all of that. It's a very aesthetically modifiable car, but not a lot in performance. My last American contender would, of course, be the Crown Vic, like I said, but it is not really something, it's not my #1 list, so it's something that I'll look if I get desperate for a V8, and it's like my only option that's not a Dodge product. The G8 is, of course, in my running as well. if they can fall. The G8 is my number one choice from the V8 sedan market, so if I can get a G8 instead of a Charger, I will take the G8, but G8s are not really popular in that price range, and when they are, they have a ton of miles. So I'm being particular about everything this time around, so I'm not willing to buy a 180,000 mile G8 just because it was in my price range. I'm not that desperate. But that's kind of the American contenders: the G8, the Dart, the Charger and Magnum, as well as the Crown Vic in a desperation thing. Like I said, all the coupes and muscle cars would be in contention. All three of the big three muscle cars, the Mustang, Camaro, and Challenger, would all be in the running. If the Challenger was cheaper, the Camaro was cheaper, and the Mustang, insurance stuff, and that goes for all three of the insurance. Now we're going to move to Europe, and this is probably the market that you're more than likely going to see me purchase if that's the route I go down. I have a lot of love for a lot of the European cars, and my number one contender in general, not just in the European market, but out of my entire lineup of cars that I've been considering as replacements, the number one front runner is the Mark V and Mark VI Golf GTI. Now, Mark VIs are starting to catch a little bit more price. They used to be in the 8 to 9 range, but they're starting to go back up. The Mark Vs as well are catching up, which is odd because the Mark 7 is plummeting. So it's like they're meeting up, it seems like. And I love the Mark V as much as the next guy does when it comes to the GTI. The Mark V GTI has always been one of my favorite cars to ever come out of Volkswagen. But if I could get a Mark VI, I'd get the Mark VI, despite the fact that I don't like the looks quite as much as the Mark V. I prefer the Mark V in appearance over the 6 and the 7 over both of them. Mark 7 would be the shoe-in if I could afford one, but Mark 7s are still kind of above 10, and that's kind of a bit of an issue, because 10 is like, you know, it's above my budget, but if I could swing a payment on a 10 grand car, I would totally do it, which will obviously open the door up to Mark 6s in general, because Mark 6s tend to hover around that range. But the Mark V is kind of like the closest thing to a shoe-in that we'll have, because it is the most common found under 7, under 8 even. I found one that had 60,000 miles last night for 8. And it is pretty much the exact spec that I wanted, a black GTI with the DSG, because manuals are kind of hard for me right now. As a lot of people know, my ability to drive stick is never fully developed, and I don't really want to force myself to learn on a daily driver. And I do have a couple cars that I will talk about later that are restricted to the only way I'm buying one is if it's a manual. But right now I'm focusing on the automatic trims as much as I really don't want to go back to another automatic. Because of the fact that my skill isn't there yet, and I'd rather learn in a car that I don't have to drive every day. So that's kind of that with the Golf. The GTI would more than likely be a DSG car unless I just magically learn stick in time. But that's kind of the scenario at play there. Is my number one Euro car is the GTI. My number one car in general right now is the GTI. Of course, from Europe, another car that can be commonly associated with my list would be the Audi A4. Again, pretty much the same concept as the GTI, 4-cylinder turbo with all-wheel drive, and again, with a dual clutch or a manual transmission option. I would more than likely get the dual clutch in this car as well. The Audi A5 would be my theoretical choice, but the issue is the A5 is, of course, a coupe, which means higher insurance. Even though the Audi A5 is probably one of my favorite European coupes ever made, outside of the 92 M3. But speaking of BMW, I would consider a 335i sedan if they weren't notoriously unreliable. These cars can be found in the 8 grand range. The problem is they have a good bit of mileage, and 335i's are probably some of the most unreliable cars ever sold, and they are well known for their problems. So I'd have to be okay with, one, being able to go to another 6-cylinder, which I'm not entirely afraid of because I do love my inline 6 cars. Theoretically, every 6-cylinder car on this list is an inline 6, not a V6. So I wouldn't be the most upset about jumping to a 335i sedan. It would be fun. It'd be more of a status symbol kind of car if I wanted to look a bit more rich than I am, which I'm not. I would probably get a 335i because people look at it, the dude's got a modernish BMW. I mean, he's got to have some level of money, right? But of course, I don't care about that. I've already got all this stuff that I would have wanted that a status symbol would have affected anyway. I mean, I don't think it matters very much that I get a modernish BMW, especially knowing that the 335i is very unreliable. Of course, it is a very good performance platform, which is why I would still strongly consider it, but it is very unreliable. So it would take a little bit of convincing up here to be like, I can kind of put up with it, I guess, you know. Obviously, the 135i would be consideration. I was looking at coupes, again, as well as the 335 coupe. But for now, since I'm only looking at sedans, the 335 sedan will be the choice I would make from BMW. Of course, from Europe, I don't really have any other options. The Abarth 500 would be in contention if it didn't have its reliability problems as well. It shares a lot of its issues with the Dart, so obviously it makes it kind of a hard choice for me to be like, yeah, I'm totally getting an Abarth 500, despite how much I love those cars. That's just one of those cars. The reliability is just so bad, I cannot see myself buying one. But I would love to drive one. You know, I'd love to go and drive one. I'd love to experience what they're like to drive, but it would not be a car that you see me driving every day to and from work and being like, dude, this is my car, you know, as much as I love them. But outside of Europe, really, those are the only options I've really thought about. There was a point where I considered a Jaguar XK with the V8, not the XKR because those are just a touch too expensive for me, but the XK with the V8, of course, those are coupes, so hard to find. The S-Type would also be a consideration there as well because it comes in a V8 option, and they're not terribly expensive with the V8. But I would think that I would more than likely still pick the Volkswagen and Audi over the Jaguar, just because the Jaguar's got a more of an older demographic. I'm 21 years old. So, I mean, driving a Jaguar at 21 might be a little bit odd. Not that I care what anyone thinks, but it's like, you know, I don't know. I mean, I say that, I care a lot about what people think. I mean, it's probably my biggest flaws. But anyway, we'll go to Asia now. I'm saying Asia instead of just Japan because I do have a Hyundai in the list, which I'll go off first. The Veloster Turbo, the first generation model. Now, of course, people are probably going to complain because the first generation Veloster is either you really love it because you really like how it looks, or you really hate how it looks. And I'm kind of in the middle. I don't think it's necessarily the best looking car in the world. It is a little bit hard on the eyes at times, but I do think that it's good enough for me to be like, yeah, I could drive that. And I like the first gen Veloster, and I think that the turbo model is the only way I'd get a Veloster. No automatics, of course, in this car. This is the one car on the list that I would force myself to learn the manual in if I got it, because the Veloster Turbo's 6-speed auto, the torque converter, is not something I want to drive. It's not a bad transmission, but it's just not something I genuinely want to drive. And of course, I would consider the Genesis Coupe here as well if the Genesis Coupe wasn't a coupe. If I could swing a coupe on insurance, I would totally buy a Genesis Coupe. I've had a lot of love in those cars. I learned manual in a Genesis Coupe, so I have a lot of attachment towards the Genesis Coupe in that regard. But unfortunately, I don't have the kind of skills yet for manual, and I think that the Genesis Coupe would be kind of left out for now until I could get my own one day and could swing a coupe. But the Veloster Turbo, as well as the Kia Forte 5 SX, I think it just makes sense that the Forte 5 is included with the Veloster Turbo because it is technically the same car and is a spiritual successor to the little red Kia Spectre 5 that we have out here in the driveway, which will be kind of the center of the KDM video when that comes out. I just love the KDM stuff. The KDM scene is probably one of my favorite scenes to come out of the car world. We were kind of a part of the KDM scene before it was cool. So I have a lot of love for the KDM cars. So the Veloster Turbo, the Kia Forte 5 SX, and the of course, if the Genesis Coupe was you know, a car I could swing on insurance, because Genesis Coupes you can find $8 grand all day. I would consider strongly a Genesis Coupe if I could get the insurance. But from Japan, we've only got a few representatives here. From Toyota and Lexus, the IS300 is probably one of my front runners as well. It's my number 2. It's the GTI, then the IS300. My 2 favorite cars to come out of each of a company in the early to mid 2000s. I love the GTI and I love the IS300 so much. The IS300, of course, you guys know my dream car is the Mark IV Supra, and it only makes sense that the IS300 be consideration at all because of the fact that it shares its engine with an actually aspirated Mark IVs. It's a 2JZGE engine, which you guys know how much I love the 2J as an engine. It's an engine that if I could do an engine swap on my truck, that'd be the first engine to pick. That'd probably be the only option I would have. Despite the fact that, you know, the V8s are easier to swap, I would put a 2J in that truck because I just love that engine so much. And I think that a 2J sedan, even better though, the more specific car that I would want is the IS300 Sport Cross, which is a station wagon IS300. So you get the wagon with a 2J, and it's like two of my favorite things merged into one car. Now, of course, finding a manual IS300 is nearly impossible, so this is a car that I'd have to come to terms with getting an automatic regardless. And I'm okay with that. It's an IS, it's a JZ platform, it's a really tried and true car that will last forever and be reliable. Of course, gas mileage isn't great, but I mean it's better than my truck. What a truck is. I say was like I don't have it anymore, but it is. It's just the ultimate car for me. It's practical, it's fun, it's got my favorite engine in it of all time. It is very modifiable, and it's one of my favorite cars ever made. And I think that the IS300 would be a shoe-in for my next car. If I can get a good deal on an IS before I can get a good deal on a GTI, I'll probably get the IS. I just really like those cars. Of course, the GS300 is also in consideration because of the fact that it is, again, a 4-door with the 2JZGE and is a little bit easier to find than the IS with the right mileage that I want. Of course, they do tend to be a touch more expensive than the IS, but I think at my price point at $8 grand, getting an IS or a GS would be relatively simple with good mileage. because that tends to be when they have low mileage is where they tend to hide, is around this is about the 6 to 7 gram park. So getting one for 8 shouldn't be a problem for either of the IS or the GS300. And then we're going to move to Honda, because in the world of Honda, I mean, there is just so many options you have, and I think that I've got quite the list of cars that are on my list. Now, obviously, this is going to kind of ignore my coupe rule, because the RSX Type S is a car that I strongly consider every time I look at getting a new car. Anytime I think about it, anytime I, am like, I wonder what car I would buy if I could get a new car right now. The RSX Type S is always one of the first cars I bring up. And it is because it's a K20A car. I love the K20. It's one of my favorite engines ever made. It revs high. It's pretty much as close as you can get to a front-wheel drive S2000 without buying an Integra or a Del Sol and doing all the mods to that. The RSX Type S is very close out of the box to the S2000, which is why I think that it would be one of my shoe-in choices. The RSX Type S would be the only car I'd violate my coupe rules for, because I know at the end of the day it still wouldn't even be that bad on insurance compared to the rest of the cars on the list if they were available in their coupe forms, like the SC300 or the 335 coupe, the Mustang, stuff like that. All those would have skyrocket insurance, and RSX Type S's are a lot better in insurance than any of those cars. So that'd be a shoe-in choice for me. As well from Honda is the FA5 Civic Si, one of my favorite cars from Honda. Again, another really good example of a really good Honda. That's not the S2000. The FA5 Si is a great car, and it comes in sedan and coupe variants, so I would more than likely get the sedan. I personally prefer the FA5 sedan over the FA5 coupe, but that would be my choice in Japan. Would be the Civic Si and the RSX Type S, as well as the other two Lexus models that I talked about. Of course, other cars from Toyota I like the MR2 Spider, but those are just a touch out of range. Again, being a coupe and a convertible at the same time, it's like that is a death wish for an insurance. Or else that would be the car. That'd be a shoe-in choice for me as well. It would be the MR2 Spider, but of course I can't afford the insurance in the MR2 Spider, so that we'll have to leave for now. As far as that goes, I don't really have any Nissans in particular I'm looking out at, because again, the only cars from Nissan that were really fit in the enthusiast image are their coupe models, which are of course the 350 and 370, but both of those are coupes and are notoriously bad on insurance, so I have to kind of pass on those for now. And of course, all their sedan offerings that are performance-oriented, like the Century STR Spec V, are just not really what I want. I want some with a Turbo 4 if I'm going to go for a 4-cylinder, so which is why the only two Turbo 4 model cars on this list are the Dart 1.4T, the Veloster Turbo, and the Golf GTI. So I mean, technically there's 4 of the Audi A4. I don't know why I said 2. But there's technically 4 with all the 4-cylinder turbo cars on this list. But pretty much, that is my list of cars that I would consider as replacements for my Sport Trac. I apologize for how long this video was, but I want to go through my entire list. So, hope you guys liked the video. What car would you pick out of the list? Of course, I'm open to... I'm not really open for the suggestions, because those are kind of my choices. But pick out what your favorite from the list was, what car you would pick from that list. If you were in this situation. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. Have a fantastic New Year's. I'll see you guys next Monday with my favorite cars from each global market. And have a great day, guys. Take care.